These are the all-new SRAM Maven brakes. They're the most powerful brakes SRAM has ever created, and they have some new features which I think that some people are gonna like.
In this video, we're going to cover all the technical aspects of these new brakes and share our first impressions with the Maven's performance on dirt. Let's go. Besides politics, somehow mountain bike brakes seem to be one of the most divisive subjects on planet Earth. Just head over to our Instagram page where you'll notice that any of our posts related to brakes get many more comments than posts about literally anything else. Now, love them or hate them, SRAM brakes have held the dominating position in mountain bike brakes over the past decade when it comes to the sheer amount of volume of their brakes on the trails.
That's right. They have a massive OE presence, meaning that they come stock on tons of bikes. And that means that most riders on the trails have owned or ridden SRAM brakes at some point in their riding career, including you. Until today, the current generation of SRAM codes were the highest level of power in the SRAM brake lineup, and they were released about 7 years ago now. Now, the codes have finally been outgunned, and the all-new SRAM Mavens are here with more power and some key differences over the codes. And yes, just like I teased in the intro, Mavens now use a mineral oil rather than a dot fluid. So, stay tuned to learn more about that, as I'm pretty sure that's going to be the talk of the internet for a little while.
Up first, we're going to talk about all of the new tech and performance claims, then dive deeper into the switch to mineral oil, then talk about the setup and tunability, then show the different models, and finally share our initial reviews on the performance of the Mavens after getting some ride time with them. There's a lot to cover, so let's get into it.
Let's go.
The SRAM Mavens are a completely new brake from the lever to the caliper, and they're the new top dog in the SRAM brake lineup when it comes to power. Now, with more power than codes, they're aimed directly at the gravity-focused riders. Codes are not being discontinued or anything, but the Mavens are SRAM's new solution for the most aggressive forms of riding like downhill, enduro, and full-weight e-bikes, where riders are really depending on massively strong brakes to keep them in control on steep and heinous terrain.
SRAM claims the Mavens have 50% more power than the codes, which is pretty dang impressive considering the code RSCs have plenty of power for tons of riders. This power bump comes from a few changes over a code. First, a Maven caliper has massive pistons with two 19.5 and two 18mm pistons behind the brake pads. For a quick comparison, a code has two 16 and two 15mm pistons, and the next closest piston sizes to the Maven is the Hope Tech 4 V4, which has two 18 and two 16mm pistons. In addition to the big old pistons increasing stopping power, SRAM also says that the Maven levers utilize an optimized lever-to-piston caliper ratio and requires 32% lighter input force at the lever to produce the same amount of power as the codes. These calipers also feature piston seals that are made with a new proprietary material, which SRAM is pretty hyped on.
After analyzing how brakes fail when they overheat, SRAM states that the caliper seals were often the weak link, and that this new seal material retains its sealing qualities even when the brakes get hot enough for the rotors to glow. That's hot. Now let's quickly cover two smaller key changes to these brakes and others from SRAM. Now first, we'll look at the levers. The Maven levers use SRAM's stealth hose angle to keep your cockpit and cables nice and tidy, but the angle of the Maven hose is parallel with the bar rather than pointed at the bar like previous models of stealth levers. This is going to be a welcome feature for SRAM brake fans, as I did hear complaints of the previous hose angle being a little extreme and rubbing on handlebars.
This new angle is also going to be applied to all the other stealth levers like the codes and levels, so that'll just be a rolling change in our current generation of those brakes. Now, let's circle back to the calipers. Inside of every Maven caliper is SRAM's new XL brake pads, which are noticeably larger than code pads. And that's because of those massive pistons that the Maven caliper uses. The XL brake pads come in either an organic or a sintered metallic compound with a steel backing plate, and the backing plate has this little fin hanging off the bottom. The brake pads are installed into the Maven calipers from the bottom rather than the top like other SRAM brakes. And the fin makes it super easy to grab with your little fingers so you can install it super quickly, just like a NASCAR-style pit stop. Also, from here on out, SRAM is using this t-shirt size naming convention for their brake pads, which makes it pretty freaking easy to find brake pads for your SRAM brakes.
All right, folks, get your typing fingers ready to hit the comments and leave your thoughts and opinions about brake fluid, because we're going to do a deep dive into a pool of mineral oil. Okay, let's talk about the biggest change to the Mavens compared to SRAM's other high-end models of brakes, which is that they use mineral oil instead of dot fluid. We can already see some of you guys flying down to the comments section to tell us that mineral oil has a lower boiling point than dot fluid and doesn't belong in mountain bike brakes, or that any company that ever used dot fluid are a bunch of jerks. Hey, now pump your brakes because there's actually some really good reasons why SRAM decided to use mineral oil in the Mavens. Now, we do not want to make this a dot fluid versus mineral oil video, but here's a quick rundown on the subject.
While the boiling point of mineral oil is slightly lower than dry dot fluid, it's far more consistent for the lifespan of the brake than dot fluid, because dot fluid will actually slowly absorb water from the atmosphere and become wet, which will lower its boiling point the longer it's in your brake system. But mineral oil is hydrophobic, meaning that it does not absorb moisture from the atmosphere, and it'll keep the exact same boiling point the entire time it's trapped in your brake lines. Because of that, the service interval of the Mavens is 2 years compared to 1 year of the codes with dot fluid. That means, on paper, you'll have to bleed your Mavens half as often as the codes, assuming that your initial bleed is done correctly.
SRAM partnered up with Maxima to develop a mineral oil to meet and exceed all the guidelines SRAM was looking for in their new fluid. This particular mineral oil is Jolly Rancher green, and it looks pretty delicious. However, it's about as safe to drink as dot fluid, and we don't need another Tide Pod challenge situation on our hands. Unlike dot fluid, there aren't any regulations around mineral oil, so different brands of mineral oil actually have a very different final product. And the Mavens seals and everything are designed very specifically to work with this Maxima mineral oil. That means you can only use the Maxima mineral oil in the Mavens, and the brake's warranty will be void if you use any other type of mineral oil. Along with the new mineral oil brakes comes a new SRAM mineral oil bleed kit that you'll need to use to bleed the Mavens, and you'll find everything you need to get a perfect bleed on the Mavens in this kit.
This is also the exact same bleed kit that's used on the SRAM DB8 brakes, which are similar to the codes but a bit more affordable. To completely remove any possibility of cross-contamination of fluids, the different SRAM bleed kits for dot fluid and mineral oil actually have different size fittings on the attachment at the lever and on the bleeding edge fitting on the caliper. This means it is 100% impossible to accidentally use a dot fluid syringe in a mineral oil brake and vice versa. SRAM has a great video explaining how to bleed the Mavens, which we're going to link down below in the description, and we highly recommend following those steps exactly when setting up your own Mavens.
We first saw SRAM use mineral oil in their budget-friendly DB8s, which were released not too long ago, but at least for now, all SRAM brakes besides the Maven and the DB8 will continue using dot fluid. We have literally no idea if they'll change any other brakes to mineral oil, so only time will tell. Okay, I'm about as excited as a kid on Christmas Eve to see the comments about brake fluid, but with that out of the way, let's talk about the tunability of the Mavens.
All of the braking power in the world sounds great, right? But the fact of the matter is, each rider is different and requires a different set of braking characteristics to match their riding style, weight, and the conditions that they're riding in. SRAM is capitalizing the word tunability with these new brakes so that every rider can set up their Mavens in an optimal manner that best uses all of the available stopping power for their needs. Basically, what they're saying is that the Mavens are powerful enough to a point that riders can forget about just slapping the biggest rotors in the world on their bike and remove the assumption that a bigger rotor is better. With that said, SRAM recommends that riders start by setting up their Mavens with the smallest rotors that their bike can fit, and then increase the rotor size from there if needed. And we're going to touch a little bit more on that in just a second.
All right, now let's talk about the important factor of heat and how SRAM designed the Mavens to be best buddies with high temps. You'll notice that the Maven calipers are physically huge, and SRAM claims the size and design of the caliper leads to an overall more consistent brake that's at an optimal temperature more often. The big caliper fights fading from heat on long descents while also retaining that heat to maintain a more consistent temperature and feel on flat sections of trail or during a P-brake where the brakes aren't being used and are cooling down. That's kind of all from the SRAM presentations, except the P part. We put that in there.
That was us.
While many riders believe that heat is only a bad thing, it's actually a very important part of any brake's proper functionality. When you finish a long climb and drop into a steep descent, you'll notice that your brakes will take a little while to start grabbing with full power, and that's because the pads and rotors need to heat up before they start working perfectly.
Conversely, rotors and pads can get super hot in long descents or with heavier riders, and reaching a heat that is outside of the operating range is obviously bad. So, what we're trying to do is find that Goldilocks rotor size that works best for each different rider in all scenarios. Not too hot, not too cold. SRAM recommends starting with smaller rotors so that you don't need to wait long for the brakes to output maximum power and really grab. And then from there, you can analyze if the smaller rotors are getting too hot in your descent, and you can increase that rotor size if you feel like your brakes are holding you back from full power and performance. Basically, let's just sum it all up. You should use the rotor size that gets your brakes to the right temperature rather than going as big as possible to get more power, because you'll get the most possible power when your brakes are the right temperature.
A similar way of looking at optimal brake setups are with race cars. If you're building a Porsche to race through road courses on the weekends while still being able to take it out for coffee on the weekdays, you wouldn't want to put all-out track-specific brake pads on this car. Track-specific pads are extremely loud and have little to no power when used on the streets where they don't have the high temps in them that you'd get when pushing the car on the track. These Mavens are optimized around the SRAM HS2 rotors, which are 2 millimeters thick, and SRAM recommends always mating these rotors to these Mavens. The HS2s are just great rotors all around, which we've had a great experience with when paired with other models of brakes, and I very often see folks on forums that have kind of upgraded to the HS2s with lots of other brake models with great success.
Also, SRAM is shipping all models of the aftermarket Maven with organic pads. Again, because SRAM believes that the power output of the brake doesn't necessarily require as aggressive of a pad or the mega big rotors to create enough power for most riders. And they truly encourage riders to tune their own brake pad and rotor setup. Here at the Lost Co, we're all used to running metallic brake pads since they're naturally better suited towards most of the trails that we ride, which are super steep, and it is just super wet here most of the year. However, organic brake pads are quieter and more responsive with a stronger initial bite in dry conditions, and since most riders are hitting the trails when it's dry out, SRAM wants riders to start with quiet organic pads with lots of bite.
As much as SRAM is hyping up the tunability of the Mavens, it's really nothing new. And our apologies for using so many air quotes. We're kind of just emphasizing the words that SRAM chose to use for this Maven launch. Riders have been experimenting with different sizes of rotors and different pad compounds since the release of hydraulic mountain bike brakes decades ago. Honestly, I foresee most folks being a bit skeptical of SRAM's recommendations on rotor size and everything, and I think we'll see a lot of people wanting to kind of run what they know and looking to mate their Mavens with the same sizes of rotors and the same pad material as to what they were running with their last brakes. However, we do think it's great for SRAM to point out that there really isn't such thing as kind of a one pad compound to rule them all, or that bigger rotor equals better. For example, I'm 155 pounds. I absolutely do not need a 220 millimeter rotor on the front and rear of my trail bike when mated to a super powerful brake for most conditions I'm riding in. And honestly, I would be a prime candidate to start with the small 180 millimeter rotor front and rear, since those are the minimum rotor sizes on my Stumpjumper EVO and RockShox Lyric. I'll likely try this, and I hope to get a more long-term review made in the future with these details.
In the end, rotor size and pad compound, it really comes down to rider preference and experience. But we do recommend that you keep your options open and experiment with different rotor sizes and pad compounds to see what setup works best for you. Next, let's explain the differences between the different models of Mavens that you'll actually be able to get your hands on. Just like SRAM's Code and level brakes, the Maven comes in 3 different spec levels: Ultimate, Silver, and Bronze. Luckily, the power and performance of each different Maven flavor is identical, with a few relatively small differences separating the models. One thing worth noting is that we're using a super limited edition set of the Maven Ultimate brakes for our test brakes in this pretty sweet red splash colorway that reminds us of Eddie Van Halen's guitar. You can only get this super limited color of the Maven caliper if you get your hands on the Maven Ultimate Expert Kit, which includes 2 brakes, 4 rotors, 2 sets of brake pads, 2 brake adapters, and a bleed kit. But again, those are super limited, and once they sell out, they're never going to get restocked again. Kind of like that super limited Fox 38 with the pistachio paint from a few years ago that we still somehow get emails about. If you're watching this video even a week after it's uploaded, then it's likely that these are already sold out forever. So let's talk about the brakes that you can actually get.
The Maven Ultimate is the top tier option with titanium hardware holding the caliper together to save about 10 grams over the Maven Silver. It also has a pad contact adjustment and tool-free reach adjustment on the polished silver lever, and both work exactly the same as other RSC models of SRAM brakes. The pad contact adjustment changes where the brake pads bite the rotor in the lever stroke, and this feature alone creates a truly customizable fit and feel to every rider's size of hands and personal preferences. The lever blade is alloy and also rides on a bearing for a super smooth lever pull. The Maven Silver has all the same features as the Ultimate on its anodized black lever and has a slightly heavier caliper because of stainless steel bolts holding it together. Wow, 10 grams extra, can't believe it. That means the Maven Silver also has both tool-free reach and contact adjust, and the lever swings back and forth on a bearing.
Last up is the Maven Bronze, which is the most affordable model. The bronze unfortunately loses the contact adjustment on its gray lever body, and it also uses a bushing for the lever to pivot instead of a bearing. Luckily, there's still a tool-free reach adjust to get the fit just right, and you'll also find the same stainless steel bolts holding that gray caliper together. Also, just like the Code and level brakes, the silver spec is actually black, and the ultimate spec is silver, and the bronze brakes are gray, which we just don't have an explanation for, but that's just how SRAM decided to name everything.
Honestly, man, I've considered suing SRAM for false advertisements, but currently I'm a little wrapped up in a legal battle with Schwalbe after their Big Betty tire slandered my mother Betty's name, who is a completely normal size. My favorite part of all 3 levels of Maven is that every model's lever has a feature we didn't mention yet, and that is the infamous swing link. Now, the swing link is a feature that does not come on other models of SRAM brakes designated with the R model, which is a huge bummer because the swing link increases the power and feel of SRAM brakes tremendously. For example, the SRAM Code R came stock on tons of bikes, but they're just a pretty lackluster model of brakes in regards to power and feel. Let's just say the Code R is not on my list of favorite brakes, and I think most serious riders would agree with me there. However, the SRAM Code RS and RSC both use the swing link and feel so much better than the R model and feel like a completely different, much more high-performance brake compared to the Code R. Personally, I do feel as if the swing link should be a standard option in all SRAM brakes from how well they make the brakes feel and perform, and luckily this is a standard feature on all of these Mavens. So it's great to see that the budget-priced enduro rigs that come stock with the Maven Bronze are gonna have the same power and feel as the more pricey models, despite missing out on a few small features. Also worth noting is that the overall caliper design is the same between all models too.
So, if you are hunting for a set of Mavens to install on your personal bike, all you'll need to do is decide which model is in your budget and which features you'll most appreciate. The Maven Ultimate sells for $300 each brake, the Maven Silvers are $265 each brake, and the Maven Bronze will cost just $185 for each brake. These prices fit right in the same $250 to $300 window when compared to our other favorite high-performance brakes from other brands. While the Bronze is the most affordable option, we definitely expect most riders to gravitate towards the Maven Silver to get all the same performance of the Maven Ultimate, but at a slightly lower price. Now that we've differentiated the models, let's talk about how these brakes actually feel on the trail.
Hey, Tor, what happened there, bud?
A little too much handbrake in that corner. I got sideways and parked it and almost went to the ditch here, but luckily with these Mavens, I was able to ride it out.
Oh yeah, the Mavens!
Maybe they were too strong.
Not your skill at all, just the brakes.
No, certainly not. So, the both of us have spent some time riding with the Mavens, but this definitely isn't meant to be a long-term durability or performance review, and we're likely gonna have to make either a future video about the long-term review of these brakes or just compare them directly to other popular models out there. However, we've both ridden enough brakes at this point that we can usually tell the full spectrum of a brake's personality and performance in just a few rides. With that said, we're both just gonna go ahead and share our thoughts and opinions on new Mavens, but do keep in mind that we're professional bike nerds that ride tons of products, so it's our job to nitpick and analyze things as much as possible. And as a precursor to that tunability of the Mavens with the pads and the rotors, we've both tried various setups with the pad compounds and rotor sizes. We both rode the organic pads with a 200mm front and 180mm rear rotor, and the metallic pads with a 220mm front and 200mm rear rotor. All right, let's check it out, let's get into it, let's see what we think. When it comes to getting your brakes set up, getting a good bleed and good installation overall are crucial to having your brakes feeling how they should. With the Mavens, this was absolutely true, and I would 100,000% recommend following SRAM's bleed and piston massage procedure to ensure that the brakes are set up well enough to endure the super long bleed interval. We did have a bit of a finicky time getting the brakes set up to feel exactly how we wanted them to feel, but after a little bit of extra time on the work stand, they were feeling perfect and continue to feel that way on the trails throughout our testing.
Okay, so I have been running the SRAM Code RSCs ever since they came out, which is a while ago. Time flies, it's crazy. And I still have them on my enduro bike now. So it's safe to say that I'm extremely experienced with exactly how these feel and function. I'm about 155 pounds, and I've always been pretty happy with the power of the Code RSCs, but hey, more power is always nice. And after riding the Mavens just a short distance on my first ride with them, I noticed that the Mavens are absolutely more powerful than the Codes right off the bat, and that's about the most simple yet important factor to point out. So if you're a fan of SRAM brakes and you're currently running Codes but want to bump up in power, then the Mavens are going to check those boxes for you. However, aside from the noticeable bump in stopping power, there are some key differences between the two brakes. The first thing you'll notice right on the shop floor is that the Maven levers require more breakaway force to move the lever past the point of being fully outward. It's sort of hard to explain, but the lever has a bit of an initial tension to kind of pull past, and it sort of snaps into the lever throw. Once you're past the initial breakaway point and modulating the brakes within the throw of the lever pull feels pretty comparable to a Code. Personally, I like my lever reach pretty far from the bar with little to no lever throw before the pads bite the rotor. So I'm happy that the pad contact adjustment functions the same as other SRAM brakes. This means that I do spend a bit more time working with that initial breakaway point in the lever, but for folks that run their pad contact pretty far in towards the bar, you'll spend less time overcoming the initial force required to get the lever moving, and might not notice this quite as much as I did. Also, I'm just a pretty small dude and my hands are nothing like Alex Honnold's, so folks with more muscle in their hands might just think I'm a little bit When it comes to tuning the power of the brakes, I thought that both of our rotor and pad setups worked great and served specific purposes very well. All of our testing was done on pretty chilly days between 40 and 50 degrees with pretty wet trail conditions.
Believe it or not, all these clips were actually filmed the same day. I mean, look at this now. It's so nice out. It was like raining on us 20 minutes ago. So
like raining hard.
Raining super hard. This is just classic PNW.
We're about ready to pack up and leave.
We were like 40% ready to just get out of here.
Give us a like for sticking
Seriously.
it out.
It's been a long time since I've run a full organic brake pad, but I thought that the organic pads and 200 plus 180 rotor felt pretty great. The organic pads bite hard when you first pull the lever and provided plenty of stopping friction for me on steep descents where my brakes were being pulled like 90% of the length of the trail. While running the metallic pads and larger rotors, I would say that the brakes had more of a powerful feeling on steeper trails that require you to basically just drag the brakes to creep down gnarly root chutes without dying, since the metallic pads work so well with heat and constant friction. It never rained while I was using the organic pads, but I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have bit as hard as metallics if they got covered in water. Long term, I'm gonna stick with a 200mm rotor in the front and 180 in the rear, and plan on running metallic pads on my enduro bike for all seasons, metallic pads on my trail bike in the winter, and organic pads on my trail bike in the summer. But my mind could definitely change after time as I continue to test different configurations, and please take my setup thoughts with a grain of salt because I am just one small man on the internet who rides bikes, and you might feel completely different about what works best for you. To test the Mavens, I swapped out the TRP DHR EVOs from my Stump Jumper EVO. I will say that the Mavens and the DHR EVOs have pretty comparable power levels. However, the most straightforward differences are that the Mavens are more adjustable and the lever requires more overall finger force to pull, and the DHR EVO require a bit less finger pulling power and are just super sleek, and from our experience, overall easier to set up initially. If given the choice of these two brakes on a new bike build, I would likely pick the TRP DHR EVO, as my widow hands just prefer the lever feel of the TRPs. And even though I do love the pad contact adjustment on the Mavens, I could definitely look past that, as the DHR EVOs have always had a super consistent bite point that I've grown to work pretty well with. However, that doesn't mean that I'm not excited about the Mavens. For a brake that's gonna come stock on just a ridiculous amount of bikes, these things kick some serious ass and offer enough power and high-end feel to the point where I think riders are rarely gonna seek out a different brake as an upgrade. This is super common for riders that own bikes that come stock with Code, since they do seem to have less power than other popular options like those TRPs, the Haze Dominions, Magura MT7s, and Hope Tech 4 V4s. However, I just don't think that's going to be a very common trend with the Mavens, and I'm pretty happy about that. Speaking of other brakes, let's hear about what Tor here thinks about the Mavens after riding just about every brake setup ever made by man.
Right on. Well, just like Mike was saying, we have definitely not got enough time with the Mavens for me to tell you to just go throw your Haze, your TRPs into the ocean and, spend all your money on new brakes. But the Mavens have definitely cemented themselves as another viable option as a high-performance mountain bike brake. I haven't gotten as much time on the Code RSCs as Mike, but I have been spending a lot of time on pretty much every other popular brake out there. Like Mike was saying, the TRP DHR EVOs, the Haze Dominion, Magura MT7s, Hope Tech 4 V4, and all of these brakes are phenomenal products when they're set up right. And that's exactly the same case with the Maven. I would be so stoked to run any of these brakes in the long term, and the Maven is up there with the best of them once I tuned them to my liking. We're done with the air quotes.
No more air quotes.
Just like SRAM recommended, I started with a 180 mil rotor in the rear, a 200 mil in the front, and the stock organic pads that came pre-installed in the caliper. I also played a whole bunch with the reach and contact adjust on the lever, and both of those adjustments have a super wide range and are my second favorite style of lever adjustments after the Hope Tech 4 V4s. I always run my brake levers pretty close to the bar with a really short lever throw before the contact point, but I ended up running the Maven lever a little bit farther out than usual with more throw before the bite point to avoid that breakaway force that Mike was talking about in the lever throw. That allowed me to keep myself in that sweet spot of the light lever action just a little more often, but overall, the lever action of the Hayes Dominion is still my #1, with that incredibly light feel and basically non-existent breakaway force. Even though it's wintertime, which usually means wet conditions that make most of us here choose sintered pads for their better performance in the wet, we've had a perfect little dry spell to give the organic brake pads a fair shot. This is the first time I'd ridden organic pads in a while, and honestly, I was ready to say that they weren't good enough for steep trails where the brakes get super hot, but they actually kicked some butt and gave overall great power right when I dropped in. Even on steep trails where you pretty much don't let off the brakes the whole way down, the organic pad small rotor setup never really faltered, and it gave me some really consistent and quiet performance. But that being said, in that configuration, the Mavens just didn't have the same power that I'd gotten used to from other brakes I'd mentioned, so I switched it up. I threw on the metallic pads and the larger rotors. Just like on the other brakes I use, it takes a second of pretty weak braking power until the system heats up, and then you get access to noticeably more power than the organic pads. Now, I don't want this to turn into a full-on organic versus metallic brake pad video, but basically, the organic pads had a much more consistent bite that didn't change much as you use the brake, but the metallic pads gave me an overall more power once they got a bunch of heating up. Just keep using whatever brake pad material you found works best for you and your riding style on other brakes that you've run, and then that's just gonna work perfect for you in the Mavens. But if you live somewhere where it rains a bunch or has incredibly steep trails, then in my opinion, the metallic pads are almost always gonna be the better choice. With the tuned up Mavens, the power was just amazing and incredibly comparable to the Hayes Dominions and Hope Tech 4s that I've been running on my downhill bike and my trail bike. Just like those two other brakes, the Mavens give me tons of confidence to let go of the brakes and just let the bike run, because I know that I've got a lifeline waiting for me whenever I want it. Pure power is definitely going to be the Maven's strong suit, and there was definitely never an oh shit moment where I was pulling my brakes as hard as I could and wished that I had a different brake system instead. Really, my only complaint with the Maven is the lever pull, which gave me a little bit more hand fatigue than other easier to pull brake levers out there. Compared to the progressive feel of the Hayes and Hope levers, where it's easy to pull at first and then gets harder once the brake bites, the Maven's leverage curve would almost be more like a parabola, where it takes a lot of force to break away, and then it's easy to pull in the free stroke, and then it takes more force again once the pad bites. Once you're in the free stroke of the lever, there's plenty of modulation, and I didn't really have an issue with confidence while creeping down a steep rock face, but you might want to do a couple of finger curls if you've got a set of the Mavens. Now that SRAM's finally stepped up their brake game with the Maven, I would say that they've caught up to their competitors, and just like Mike was saying, I would be stoked to run the Maven on my personal bike, and I wouldn't really feel the need to buy a whole new brake system if these came stock on the next bike that I buy. But if I was going to go out and build a new bike from the ground up, I would go for the Hayes Dominions because they are just a little bit more affordable than other options, and that lever feel is just the best invention since the dropper post. But I think that the Maven Bronze is going to offer some great value with its lower price and identical power to the Maven Ultimate. And I'm also especially stoked for the Maven to be spec'd on e-bikes that actually need more braking power to slow down all that extra weight.
All right, well, there you have it. That's the new SRAM Maven. These are the most powerful brake SRAMs ever made. I think a lot of people are going to be stoked, especially the OE configurations on new bikes. A little power bump over the codes. If you guys think we missed anything or want us to explain anything more in depth, you can drop your questions in the comments, or you can call or email us at the shop and we'll respond a whole lot quicker that way. Speaking of the shop, we have Mavens in stock at thelostco.com with free shipping in the USA. Any order over 49 bucks gets free shipping in the USA.
Well, hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more mountain biking videos just like this one. And yeah, we're going to see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys.
Peace.